We're joined by a two-time National Coach of the Year, the recipient of the 2015 John R. Wooden Legends of Coaching Award. He led teams to a national championship, 3 Final Four appearances, 6 Sweet 16 appearances. He is San Diego State's all-time winningest coach and the winningest coach in Mountain West history. 386 wins, 10 conference titles, 13 postseason appearances at San Diego State. My guest is Steve Fisher. Steve, it's so good to have you back. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Jim. How are you?
I am great. Is it true or false, you are currently in the dentist chair or at the office?
I am in the office of my dentist, and he was so kind as to let me use his landline. I thought I would be here for about 45 minutes. I came in at 9:30, and I'm still here.
My man, you are playing hurt and bucking up. I appreciate it, Steve. Thanks for playing through it. It's great to have you back on. Now, you announced your retirement on Tuesday. I know you're still with the school, but what has that time since the announcement been like for you?
It's been crazy, to be honest with you. I've heard from I don't know how many people. When I went into the press conference, I said I had 175 text messages and over 50 phone calls, and from all sorts of people, from people that everyone would know to former managers and personnel that I worked with. So I've reminisced a little bit, and I have had a great deal of fun doing that.
Steve Fisher joining us. So how did you know that it was time?
I don't know for sure that you ever know that it's time. It's never black and white. But my wife Angie and I, the last 3 years, Jim, we've talked about, do we want to turn it over to Brian Dutcher and have a little more time for ourselves and be really good fans? And it just, when the season ended, we took a deep breath. We waited a week or so before we started talking and talked with both our sons, Mark, who's on staff with us, who I think you know has ALS, and Jay, who lives in L.A., and collectively said, yes, it is time. And I'm one of those guys, I'm methodical, but once I make a decision, I never look back and say, boy, I wish that I had done differently. So I'm very much at ease with the decision we made and excited about what's going to happen next for me and for San Diego State basketball.
Steve Fisher joining us once again. You know, Steve, you and I have talked about this over the years, but for those who do not remember, San Diego State was not always a basketball power. In fact, the school had losing seasons in 13 of the 14 years prior to your arrival in 1999. So what was it about that school and that program that made you feel like that was a good place for you?
Jim, when I was an assistant, after Michigan, I was with the Sacramento Kings and reunited with Chris Webber, and I loved where I was. But when I came down here, I love San Diego. Obviously, everyone does. And I looked at it. We had a relatively new facility, which is now called Viejas Arena, and a great school. And I said, I know we can create something. And our goal was to have a program, and we now have that, and we are immensely proud. And a lot of people had a helping hand in where we came from and where we are.
Well, certainly more than a program, but a power, which I'll get to in 1 minute. Steve Fisher joining us. But, Steve, I do love the stories, though. In the early days when you would go around to frat houses and coffee houses and the student union handing out free tickets to students, and they still wouldn't come to the games even though they were free. So what were the first few seasons like?
Well, my first year, there were more auxiliary people, band cheerleaders, and people that were there administratively than there were fans. Our first year, we had an announced attendance, I think, of about 1,100, and probably we were closer to 700 people that came to a building that seats 12,414. So I had to be very careful in the huddle. Angie, my wife, said, you better watch your language because we can hear you everywhere in the building.
Incredible. So did you ever imagine back then that you would retire 18 years later with nearly 400 wins at San Diego State, one banner after another, and one of the best home crowds in the nation? Not 700 people, but one of the fiercest home crowds in the nation.
That has been something that has amazed everyone, including me. I really, with all my heart of hearts, Jim, felt that we would win. How big, I wasn't sure, but I knew we would be able to create something that everyone will be proud of. But to have 12,414, and we've sold the building out since 2010 and 11 when Kawhi Leonard was a sophomore, and we went 34-3, and it's been that way ever since. And it's a spectacular, major college atmosphere in that building. And it's fun to be a part of it.
Steve Fisher, our guest. I'm going to ask you about Kawhi in a minute, but you won a national championship in Michigan, but you have said that San Diego State is your legacy. What do you mean by that?
I live here now. I've spent more time working at San Diego State than I have any place else. I'm going to continue to be a part of San Diego State, and they're going to keep me on in some capacity to help. I'm always going to have a home here. I'm very proud, and we are very much appreciated for what's happened here. But I said this, too, in our press conference. Everywhere I've been, I have felt so much joy and happiness, from my first high school job to Western Michigan to the great times we had at Michigan with great success. But right now, this is home. This is where I want to be. This is where I'm going to be for a lot longer than the 18 years that I put in already.
Yeah, you mentioned high school. If you go way back, Steve, when you were wearing checkered jackets on the sideline of Rich East High School in Park Forest, Illinois, and also working as a driver's ed instructor, what were the early days like?
Well, in my young single days, and that's when they recruited at your college campus, and we had a lot of us that came in as young singles, and we ran as a pack. I met my wife, Angie. We were both teachers at the same high school. Before I got married, before Angie told me you look like a fool with some of the outfits that I wore, I thought I looked good. I had bow ties that I would wear, and I thought I was keeping up with fashion, but I probably looked like a clown. But she's now got me dressed fairly conservatively. But I loved Rich East. And the person, Les Whitkey, who hired me at Rich East, wound up hiring me to go to Western Michigan with him 11 years later. So relationships have been critical, and they are in everyone's opportunities, and it has been for me.
Yeah, Steve, you're so modest, but if I had said to you back then at Rich East, if I had told you that one day you and Angie would not only be having success on the level that you did in basketball, but you would go to the White House, that you would hang out with Bob Hope and Audrey Hepburn, and not only that, but Bob would be talking about the games that you coached in, what would you have said?
Impossible. That would happen to someone else. It always happens to someone else, but it happened to me, and I know that. And at that time, when we were doing that, and we stayed all night at the White House, and the story you told, it happened. That's what happened. And I said 3 weeks before that, half the people in Ann Arbor, Michigan didn't know who we were. So life is strange, and you never know what's around the next bend. And I have loved what I've done. The experiences that I've been able to have as a result of basketball have been incredible, and I know that. And there are a lot of people that can coach. There are a lot of great coaches in the country at every level that don't have opportunities. I, some way, somehow, was given an opportunity, and good things happened. And I'm very appreciative for my life and what I've done, where I've been, and who I've been with.
Steve Fisher wrapping things up with me from the dental office, no less. Steve, one last thought. I mean, I could ask you about any number of players. I know that you could talk about dozens and dozens and dozens of players, but you mentioned Kawhi Leonard, so let me just bring this up. I mean, you were the first program to really recruit him hard. So when did you first come across Kawhi, and what did you think about his game at that time?
We saw him when he was a sophomore in high school and really started following him then. As a junior, he led his team to the state championship, and we've sensed that he was something special. People that watched him early on, Jim, a lot of folks said, well, he's a tweener. He's not quite big enough to be an inside player, and he's not quite skilled enough to be a perimeter player. And we saw a player who won. And he's done that at every level. I don't think anyone could have imagined he would be what he is now, one of the top 5 players in the world. But he was something special, and we had good fortune where he and maybe more importantly, his mother believed in us and liked us, and in her heart she said, I know this is the best place for my son.
He is a 2-time National Coach of the Year, the recipient of the 2015 John R. Wooden Legends of Coaching Award. He had a remarkable career, nearly 400 wins at San Diego State. Steve, I feel like you and I had these conversations over the years at San Diego State. In fact, I know we did. I always appreciated them. So when I saw the announcement that you were retiring, I wanted to make sure that it's certainly not the last time you and I will do this, but I wanted to make sure that we got you on to talk about it once again. It's always good to visit with you and always good to get caught up, and especially when you go the extra mile from the dental office. So congrats, Stephen. Really nice to have you back on.
Jim, I really appreciate you and you having me on, and I'm going to hold you to not making this be the last time that I have a chance to visit with you.
Absolutely, Coach. You know that. In fact, I'll look for you in San Diego.